Okay, in this video I'm gonna replace the valve cover gasket. It's a common failure on the N52 engines, and a telltale sign of that is when you change the spark plugs, you notice the thread of the spark plugs are a little bit wet. It's a very common indicator that the oil has seeped through the seals and made its way onto the spark plugs. That's exactly what happened to me. You can see that I already have the intake manifold removed. It's not necessary to remove the intake manifold, but I'm also changing my intake manifold to a 3-stage unit from the 330i, so I have it removed there. Before the video starts, I just want to time travel to after I've completed the valve cover gasket replacement. So for someone like me, with some but limited DIY experience, what's difficult and what are the tips for the gasket replacement? Okay, tip number 1. When you lift off the valve cover, it's gonna get caught out on the cowl here. So there's a couple screws that you can loosen, so you can partially lift up the cowl. I have more details later in my video. Tip number 2. When you put the valve cover back in, the gasket on the back side of the valve cover tends to drop off. So some people recommend to put in just a dab of super glue between the gasket and the valve cover to help keep the gasket on when you put the cover back in place. Be very careful when you put in the super glue, because the gasket is not supposed to be glued on the cover, it's not supposed to be glued on the engine block. You are not supposed to use gasket maker or anything like that. So just put in very limited amount of super glue, just enough to help hold it on. I end up not using that. So what I did instead is buy a $3 inspection mirror and very carefully run the mirror all the way around the valve cover. And if you take your time and make sure to examine every inch of the gasket, it will be fine. So with the time travel completed, let's jump back and begin the gasket replacement. The valve cover gasket comes with a few other seals for other components on the valve cover, as well as the oil filter gasket. Another gasket that's prone to fail on the N52 engines is the oil filter gasket. And unfortunately, when the oil filter gasket fails, the oil just drips down onto the serpentine belt, and the belt gets chewed up, get into the timing cover, and that can really ruin the engine. The first step of removing the valve cover gasket is disconnecting the oxygen sensors that's located on the fuel rail. There is one up here, another one is back there. And also unclip this wiring harness from the actual fuel rail. These wiring harnesses are held on by these really small metal clips, and I find it's easiest to use a pick tool and just carefully move the metal clip out of the way. Be careful not to lose it, because it's next to impossible to actually find them. Okay, once the metal clips are removed, just lift this wiring harness straight out of the way. Should be very easy to lift out. You also need to unclip these electrical connectors from the fuel rail. Just pull it straight up. Be careful not to damage this, but it's held on pretty loosely. You also need to disconnect this electrical connector on the throttle body in order to move this wiring harness out of the way. There is a ventilation hose that's connecting to the back of the valve cover. How you remove that is you squeeze the clip. There is a textured part on the opposite sides. You just squeeze on that and push it off. This hose is known to be very nasty, so it's very easy to break. So definitely be very careful when removing this hose. So what I found out in my vehicle is, as part of the intake manifold removal, I actually removed the other end of the hose already. So what I'm trying to do is I will attempt to leave the connection to the valve cover in place and see if I can lift the valve cover together with the hose. Okay, next there's a couple things we need to remove from the valve cover. First off, there is an electrical connector at the front of the valve cover. So to remove that, there is a small tab at the front. Just pull on that, that should just pull out. We also need to remove all the spark plugs. To do that, just lift this tab here. That will pop out the electrical connector. Remove that and just pull the spark plug out. If you find it difficult to pull out, just insert a extension or something through the hole on the top tab, and then just pull it out. Next, there are two electrical connectors, one at the front between the two front cylinders, and one at the rear between the two rear cylinders. Next, we are going to remove this Valvetronic motor. It's basically a continuous valve lift adjustment system. For the N52 engine under normal operating condition, the throttle body is actually wide open, and the throttle is controlled by the valve lift, which is controlled by this motor. The way to remove it is, first of all, there is a E-torque. It's actually a E8 under here, and the two more torque screws, E-torque screws here and here. We're going to remove the E-torque at the bottom first, and then just loosen the top two but not remove them, and then slowly back out the motor. Insert a 4mm Allen key to the side of the motor, turn it clockwise until you feel tension. Okay, once we feel tension, and then now we turn the 4mm Allen key counterclockwise to slowly back out the motor. Here is the Valvetronic motor. Next, it's time to remove the valve cover. They are held on by a series of E-torque screws. They are E10s. Now, all the torque screws around the perimeter has been removed. There are 3 more nuts in the center that we need to remove. Looks like it's this one here, this one in the middle, and this one back here. All of them had the electric connectors connected on them. They're pretty deep, so a deep socket helps. As you can see here, I'm kind of struggling to remove the valve cover because it's getting caught on the cowl. But there is a couple bolts that you can loosen that allows you to partially lift up the cowl, and here is how to do that. There is a cover held on by 3 bolts here, here and there. There is a bolt there under the cowl, and if you carefully lift this up, right at the corner there is another bolt. So if you take out those 5 bolts, it should allow you to partially lift the cowl up. That makes removing the valve cover much easier. For the inside nut, a flexible extension like this is very useful. For the outside bolt on the corner, just lift the upper portion of the cowl up and stick in a ratchet like this. Okay, I finally have the valve cover removed, and this is what the engine looks like with the valve cover removed. I found out that it makes the valve cover removal much easier if you just unbolt these 2 screws on the coolant expansion tank. That gives us a little free space at the holes here. Also, undo the cover on the e-box. It's held on by these 2 tabs here. Once you undo these 2 tabs, just feel your finger underneath here. I have it removed so I can turn it over. See, there are 2 clips. Just push it out and lift the cover out. Now just take a quick look under the valve cover. I'm not a mechanic, so I don't know for sure, but it seems to me all the bearings are pretty smooth. There's no scoring or anything, so everything looks pretty healthy. The other camshaft is covered, so I can't really see it. And then those are where the spark plugs goes. So as I said, I found out the spark plugs are coated in oil. That's where the oil gets in. Now I'm gonna remove the gasket for the Valvetronic servo motor. Okay, now it's time to install the new cover. Side with a mic section, faces up. I didn't find a torque spec for tightening this bracket onto the valve cover, only for fastening the actual motor onto the cylinder head, which I actually found 2 specs, either 10 Nm or 4 Newton meters plus a 90-degree rotation. So for all the screws, I'm just gonna use the 10 Newton meters back. That is on, now flip it over and put in the new spark plug seals. Now it's time to install the new gasket. If you order the BMW OEM gasket, there is a tab on the gasket that helps you orient it. Now it's time to put the valve cover back on. Now we just need to tighten down all the torque screws to 9 Newton meters. After all the bolts have been tightened down, the next step is to install the sleeves for the spark plug tubes. The old ones are probably destroyed when being removed. In that case, replace them with new ones. And then reinstall the spark plugs and the wiring harness for the fuel injectors. With everything put back together, this is the first startup of the car. Alright, that first startup seemed to go well, but actually a few days after filming this video, I found out that the engine idle is kind of rough. It's not terrible, but you can definitely tell that it's not smooth. I will have a future video trying to find out what's going on. Until then, happy DIYing.